Welcome to the Bentley Institute's Staadpro Generating Wind Loads training course. Over the next series of videos, we will demonstrate how to generate wind loads in Staadpro, including creating the wind load definition according to the ASCE 7 design standard, defining the wind load cases, and creating the wind load items. For this video, we'll be focusing on creating the wind load definition, which will be the first step into incorporating our wind loads into our Staadpro model. Staadpro does have the ability to generate wind loads based on a number of different codes and reference standards, and then apply these to a variety of structure types. Pressure distributions are calculated and converted into forces, which are then applied to the structure as nodal loads. To create our wind load definition, we will create a separate load definition item for the windward, leeward, and sidewall loads for each global axis direction. In this video, we'll be focusing on creating the wind load definition, which is the first step for incorporating code wind loads into your Staadpro model. Staadpro does have the ability to generate wind loads based on a number of different codes and reference standards, and then it's able to apply these to a variety of structure types. Pressure distributions will be calculated and converted into forces, which are then applied to the structure as nodal loads. For our sample model, we will be creating the wind load definition, and we should consider the windward, leeward, and sidewall pressures in each of the global axis directions. The first step for incorporating our wind load definitions is to select the General tab in the page control area, followed by the Load and Definition subtab. In the Load and Definition dialog, we will expand the Definitions group, and we will see that load definitions can be used for several different loading types to add more information to the model. Once these load definitions are created, they can then be incorporated into one of our load cases as a load item. For this training, we'll be focusing on our wind definitions, which will be used to define the values for all the parameters required to generate wind loads according to the selected code and design standard. As wind loads are developed for a structure, it is not uncommon to find that the values for these parameters may vary depending upon the particular wind direction being considered. For this sample structure, we would require 6 wind load definitions, which will be used to consider the wind load in each global axis direction and for each wall of the structure, such as your windward, leeward, and side walls. For this training course, we will be focusing on generating the wind load definition for the global X direction. We are now ready to create our first wind load definition. I'm going to go over to the Load and Definition dialog and highlight the wind definition item, and then I'll click Add. Here I just simply need to name my wind load, and I'm going to call this Windward X for the X direction, and I'm going to leave the type number set to 1. This type number will later let me identify this wind load definition when I incorporate it into a load case detail. Once I've created my wind load definition, I can go ahead and click Add, and then I'll click Close. And here I can see I've created my first wind definition, and now I need to add my code parameters to it. To do that, I'm going to highlight this wind load definition, and then again just click Add. Here I can enter my intensity versus my height table manually if I choose to, or I can use Staadpro to calculate the wind loads for me using the ASCE 7. I'll click this button, and then I can see that I can enter a variety of code parameters. I'm going to enter my code according to the ASCE 7 2010. I can enter my building classification category, my basic wind speed, my exposure, and my structure type. And Staadpro does allow a variety of different structure types. I can also consider topographic factors if they're applicable to my particular structure. Once I modify the common parameters per my project's requirements, I'm going to go ahead and click Apply, and now I'm ready to go on to the next section. I will now select the main building data area and enter the geometry of my building structure. For this particular structure, it is 30 feet tall. My building length along the direction of the wind, and again I'm looking at the structure from the positive X direction, is 75 feet. The building length normal to the direction of the wind is 90 feet. And I can enter a natural frequency, a damping ratio, and an enclosure classification. Once I've entered my main building data, I will again click Apply, and then I'm ready to enter my building design pressures. This particular wind definition is applying for the windward wall, so I'll select the windward radio button, and then I'll click Apply, and you can see that my table's been updated, and then I'll click OK. And through that process, Staadpro is able to populate this table using all the parameters I entered. Once you've completed adding the wind load definition, we will click Add, and you can see that our wind definition is now complete. Within my wind load definition, I can also enter an exposure factor. Now this factor is optional, and if no exposure factors are applied to the model, then by default the wind forces will be determined based on the full tributary area associated with all joints to which wind forces are assigned. For this particular model, we will not be entering any exposure factors, so I can just close this dialog. To complete my wind definitions for my wind load in my global x-axis direction, I should now also create a wind definition for my leeward wall and my side walls. To do this, I'm going to follow the same exact process I did for the windward wall, except I'm going to specify the different walls of the structure when I get to the design pressures section. So let's begin with our leeward wall. I'm going to highlight my wind definitions item, click Add again, and then I'm going to name my wind definition. I will highlight this wind definition and then click Add, and then most of the wind code parameters will be exactly the same as they were in the previous exercise. This time, when I select the Building Design Pressure option, I'm going to select the leeward wall, and then I'll click Apply, and then I'll click OK. I'm going to complete this process by clicking Add, and then I'm going to click Close. For this particular structure, again, I'm not going to consider any exposure factor. Finally, I'll create my last wind definition for my X direction for my side walls. This time, when I select my main building design pressure, I'm going to select the sidewall radio button. I'm going to click Apply and then OK. And then to officially create this definition, I'm going to click Add, and then again I'm going to just click Close. Now for this particular building structure, I am complete with my wind load definitions for my global x-axis direction, and I'd also want to create the same types of wind loads in my global z direction, except of course my main building data would change. Now in Staadpro, you are allowed to add as many wind definitions as are necessary for your particular building geometry and the particular directions that you need to consider wind for.